The history of the Muslims in the Philippines. But before we go on to the history of the Philippine Muslims, let's talk first about the author of our reference or the main source of our report, Hanbal Barra. He is an Associate Professor 5 at the Mindanao State University, Sulu, where he also served as Dean of its private school. He is an ASCO member of the National Commission for the Culture and the Arts. Now let's tackle the history of the Muslims in the Philippines. The Philippine Muslim was once a dominant group in the country. They have 500 years of political history, so far the longest political experience compared to other groups in the whole Philippines. Their culture is a blend of Islam and Adat. Adat is the sum of both pre-Islamic culture and the philosophical interpretation of Muslims on the teaching of Islam. It is itself the lasting contribution of the Philippine Muslims to the country's national body politic. However, to know the Muslim history, one should understand the role of Islam in bringing about historical development. It is the Islam that actually produced historic resistance against Western colonialism. The Philippine Muslim today became known as cultural communities owing to their culture surviving foreign hegemonism to this day. The Philippines has two lines of historical development. The first line, which is the older, came to develop in Mindanao and Sulu, and this refers to the Muslim line in the historical development. External factors swept into the country and brought the second line. The Hispanized Filipinos were central to the development of this second line. This is the product of the great historical experiences of the Filipino people under the Western rule. The history of the Philippine Muslims is part of the backbone of the historical development of the whole country. Filipino historian like Dr. Renato Constantino asserted that no Philippine history can be complete without the study of the Muslim development. Roots: Mindanao and Sulu are the original homeland of the Philippine Muslims. These areas are now the third political subdivision of the Philippines. They are located at the southern part of the country and lie around 100 miles north of equator. The areas occupy the strategic position at the center of shipping line between the Far East and the Malayan world. They are situated north of the Salaways and to the west in the state of Sabah. Mindanao and Sulu has a total land area of 102,000 square kilometers. It is a fertile region and known to be enriched of agricultural plantation, marine, and mineral resources. As recorded, more than half of the country's rainforests are found in Mindanao, while its agricultural crops include rice, corn, root crop, vegetables, cassava, and fruit. Marine products like seaweed production, fish, as well as gas and oil are dominant in the Sulu Sea. 59% of the tuna and sardines are largely taken from the Sulu Sea. Mainland Mindanao has substantial mineral deposits. Zamboanga del Sur has gold, silver, lead, zinc deposit. Davao Oriental have chromite reserve, marble deposits for Davao del Norte, and oil deposits in South Cotabato. This huge resource of the southern island has made Mindanao the promised land. However, the main concentration of Philippine Muslim population is confined largely to the western side of Mindanao down to the Sulu archipelago. In mainland Mindanao, the Muslims are dominant only in Lanao and Maguindanao provinces, while the rest of the Muslim populations are scattered in nearby provinces such as Zamboanga Peninsula, North Cotabato, Sultan Kudarat, South Cotabato, Davao Oriental, Davao del Sur, and Sarangani Island. In the Sulu archipelago, the Muslims are all dominant in three islands provinces of Basilan, Sulu, and Tawi-Tawi.
The Muslim ethnic groups are composed of 11 groups, namely the Maranao, Maguindanao, Iranon, Tausog, Yakan, Sama, Sangil, Kaagan, Kulibugan, Palawan, and Mulbog. Before I go through the descriptions of these groups, let me first define ethnic and ethnic groups. Ethnic is an Italian term for nation, while ethnic groups refers to a tribal group, These tribal groups have their own language and share a common set of traditions, which is different from other ethnic groups. They also have their own territory from which their ethnic identity is derived, which also serve as a unifying force for their group cohesiveness. Both ideological and geographical elements bind the groups in Mindanao and Sulu, so they are linked through beliefs and attitudes. The Muslim ethnic groups in the south also have cultural ties to the Muslim nations in Southeast Asia. These nations include Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, and the Patani of southern Thailand. As I have said a while ago, the Muslim ethnic groups are composed of 11 groups. Each ethnic group has their own language. Some speak one language with three variations like the Maranao, Iranan, and Maguindanao. The Sama ethnic group also have one language and has many variations such as the dialect of the Jama Mapun and the Bangini. However, in these Muslim ethnic groups, only few controls a political unit like a province or municipality. The first Muslim ethnic group that we will be tackling is the Maranao. The Maranao group literally means people of the lake. The term Maranao refers to both a group and a language spoken by residents of the provinces of Lanao del Sur and Lanao del Norte. So the Maranao group can be found in the province of Lanao, and their oldest settlement started around here. So the language of the Maranao group is similar to that of Maguindanao and Iranan. One may be confused as to which of them owns the mother tongue, since the Maranao and Iranan can understand 60% of the Maguindanao language. The Maranao also occupy the most strategic place in Mindanao. So the Maranao people lives in a closed society. Outsiders are not permitted to visit any of Lanao del Sur's communities, particularly those near the lake. Iligan City and Malabang are only the Maranao's main points of interaction with the outside world. The lifestyle of the people in this place are in their traditional attire, the malong and the abaya. So these are their traditional attire. This is the only place in the Philippines whose lifestyle is not affected with the Western trend. The Maranao group, like other Muslim ethnic groups, are courageous and have made sacrifices in defense of their nation and Islam, so they fought against the Spaniards under the flag of Maguindanao Sultanate. Lanao was unified as one province of the Maguindanao Sultanate throughout the colonial period. The American colonial authority in Manila, seeing the importance of Lanao, they encouraged landless Filipinos to relocate to Mindanao. Filipino settlers then established themselves in the north of Lanao after around 50 years, and in the 1960s, Lanao was finally divided into two provinces, Del Norte and Del Sur. Lanao. It is known to be the land of literature. An example of this is the Darangan. The Darangan is an old epic song that reflects the Maranao people's great knowledge. The biggest lake in the Philippines can also be found in the heart of Lanao del Sur. It is currently the primary source of energy in Mindanao, supplying over 80% of power system. The Mindanao State University is also located at Lano's capital, which is the Marawi City. It is a public educational institution of higher education and research.
The Maguindanaon was originally the name of a family or dynasty that ruled practically the entire island of Mindanao, particularly the old province of Cotabato. Later on, it refers to the Muslims who lived in the Pulangi Valley, which stretches over Mindanao's southwestern region. The Maguindanaon are known as floodplain people. The Maguindanao are most heavily concentrated along the shores and in the floodlands of the Pulangi River Basin, although many now lives in that surrounding areas. They are the largest Muslim group on Mindanao's island, and they dwell on the most unattractive part of the island, which is the overflowing rivers flood the marshy area of the current location of Cotabato, their ancestral territory several times in a year. In addition to that, the Maguindanaoan are also called Magind and Danao, which means people of the marshy. The indigenous population was quickly converted and adopted Islam in the early 15th century. Only with the arrival of Sharif Kabungsuan was the entire Pulangi are completely Islamized. Traders and missionaries were the first Muslims to arrive in the late 14th and early 15th centuries. They aided the development of sultanates and conquests in Mindanao and Sulu, and it is claimed that the conversion process in these areas was accelerated by the Kabungsuan system of political alliance and numerous marriages once he assumed power. The Philippines' first mosque was constructed in the late 14th century, and it is reasonable to believe that the arrival of Muslim foreign traders coincided with the founding of mosques in the Philippines. Sharaf Muhammad Kabungsuan is a prince from Johor who came to Mindanao after the fall of Malacca and introduced the Islamic religion, custom, and sultanate system of governance through preaching Islam to the native tribes around the region. Furthermore, Sharaf Muhammad Kabungsuan established the Maguindanao Sultanate in mainland Mindanao. The Sultanates of Maguindanao and Bauyan are the Maguindanao's greatest contribution to Southeast Asian civilization, since Maguindanao and Bauyan remained among the most powerful sultanates in the southern Philippines in the 21st century from a social, spiritual, and historical standpoint. The Sultanate of Maguindanao brought the entire mainland of Mindanao under its authority during its heyday or a period of greatest prosperity, and it became the instrument of the Muslims in Mindanao in thwarting or preventing Western colonialism. The Cotabato has been the seat of the Mindanao Sultanate. The ancestral land of the Maguindanao, including the hill ethnic group such as the Tiruray, Tasaday, and Subanun. The Tiruray is a predominantly pagan people in the western part of Cotabato Province, central Mindanao, Philippines. Additionally, Tirurays are famous for their craftsmanship in weaving baskets with two-toned geometric designs. While many have adopted the cultures of neighboring Muslims and Christian people, a high percentage of their populations still believe and practice their indigenous costumes and rituals. On the other hand, the Tasaday is a smaller group of people living in the highland rainforest of Mindanao. They are one of the many Manubo subgroups speaking a dialect closely related to the South Cotabato Manubo or Manubo Blit. Lastly, the Subanun was originally found along the river banks or Suba, but now reside in the mountains and pagan shifting cultivators of rice who inhabit the mountains. The colonialists had ever since been attracted to the fertile land of Cotabato. Because of its vast valley, colonialists have long been drawn to the fertile region of Cotabato, and the Cotabato area has long been the country's rice granary. As a result, colonialists have been drawn to the region of Cotabato ever since. The Maguindanao are the hardest hit of the Filipino settlement. At the beginning of the 20th century, their political power diminished after a long period of fighting and resisting colonialism and Christianization. After a long period of fighting and resisting colonialism and Christianization, their political authority waned around the turn of the century. During this time, the Maguindanao fought alone with no outside assistance. By the 1970s, 3/4 of their homeland was lost to the Filipino settlers, mostly Ilonggo and Cebuano. So the Filipino settlers, predominantly Ilonggo and Cebuano, had taken over 3/4 of their country. Furthermore, the 5 provinces of Maguindanao, Cotabato, Sultan Kudarat, South Cotabato, and Sarangani were established by the Manila government in the area. The Iranan. The name Iranan is the same as the Maranao people's name, which means people of the lake. These people have lived in the area between Lanao del Sur and Maguindanao provinces for centuries. The Iranan people are engaged in fishing and raising food crops alongside Muslim and non-Muslim neighbors. Both Maranao and Maguindanao languages are heavily influenced by the Iranan language. Their language is related to the Maranao people of Lanao and belongs to the Austronesian family. The Iranan may be the mother tongue, and the others are merely dialects. The Iranan was a component of the Maguindanao Sultanate for centuries. The Maguindanao Sultanate used to be the headquarters in Lamitan and Malabang. Both of these cities were the Iranian society's stronghold. Under the Maguindanao Sultanate's flag, Iranians battled the Western invaders. Rather than the Maranao, the Maguindanao had a significant influence on their culture. In intermarriages between an Iranian woman and an outsider man, the cultural influences of the lady's family will be more prevalent and the outsider man will be regarded as an Iranian man. Nevertheless, this does not happen in many cases. Since Iranians are traditionally sailors and pirates, they are fantastic in ocean movements and excelled at maritime activities. They used to ply the route by connecting the Sulu Sea, Moro Gulf of Calibe Sea, and raided the Spanish-held territories. The Iranians are advanced in field of education. Their socio-political organization is governed by traditional and customary laws. They have their own datus and headman. The headman acts as the mediator of dispute, as a facilitator of discussions and meetings, and they actively participated in local development. In addition to that, they managed to occupy key position in the government. The Iranian, like the Maguindanao and Tausug, have reached a level of socio-political organization comparable to the Maguindanao and Tausug. This is supported by the Datu authority system in which a single initiative is perceived. An Iranian Datu, like a sultan, exercises focal authority over his people. The Iranians have been overpowered by their neighbor due to their small population, preventing them from having their own sultanate. However, ethnic awareness was strong among the Iranians, who continued to protect their own way of life and even to define their own political predetermination. Overall, the Iranians, like other Muslim communities, are world-class in the sphere of education.
The Tausug. The Tausug is a slang word and originated from two words. Tao means people and Maisug means brave. Therefore, Tausug means brave people. The Tausug, who were the first people in the archipelago to convert Islam, are known for their unquestionable bravery. As a result, the Tausug are often referred to as Tao Maisug or brave people. They are proud for their fierce resistance to Spanish conquerors. For 300 years, the Tausug and the Spaniards were locked in a near constant war that ended when the Spaniards left the Philippines. The Tausug consider themselves superior to other Filipino Muslims and continue to live a combative lifestyle with fleeing a battle deemed disgraceful. One old Tausug proverb says, "Hanggang may buhay, may pag-asa." That means never admit defeat as long as you live. Before the coming of Islam, the Tausug had already established a central government. During the pre-colonial period, communities were already thriving, called the Banwas, smaller groups of more or less composed of 10 up to 100 Tausug that are called balangays, that means sailboat. Laws were passed orally by a patriarch concerning marriage, crime and punishments, contracts, and anything that deals with their daily lives. Their rituals and folklores are called the adat. When Islam came, Tausug leaders accepted Islam. They did not resist. As soon as they became Muslims, they made themselves models by infusing Islamic values and politics into government. Dayakan. Dayakan is a mispronunciation of the word yakal by Spaniards, where the term Basilan has originated from two words. Basi means iron and Balani means magnet. The Yakan settled originally in Basilan Island, and in the early 70s, due to political unrest, which led the armed conflicts between the military Muslims and the government soldiers. In ancient times, Basilan was thickly covered by the yakal trees, so the foreign people often mistook the name of the yakal trees as their native identity. In the 1870s, the Yakan were conquered by a Christian Tagalog who had escaped from a penal colony in nearby Mindanao. After some resistance, the Yakans recognized him as their leader with the title of Datu. he adopted Islam, but he also restricted the hostilities between Yakan and Christians. He was succeeded first by a nephew, later by that man's sons, who in 1969 was proclaimed Sultan of Basilan. The unrest in the southern Philippines in the 1970s hit the Yakan very bad. In the early 70s, a considerable part of Basilan was controlled by the rebels and many Yakans were evacuated for some years. During the colonial period, the Spaniards branded the inhabitants of Basilan as Yakan and became carried up to present.
Number 6, the Sama. The Sama derived from the term sama-sama, which means togetherness or collective effort. The Sama people are widely spread and scattered in the Sulu archipelago. Because of the exposure to nautical activities and fishing, they are geographically diversified. Also, helping each other is recognized as the norm of the Sama people. So there are actually subclusters that make up Sama people. So the first is the Bajau. Bajau are also known as the Sea Gypsies of the Sulu archipelago and Celebes Sea. They call themselves Sama Laut, while in Malaysia they are called Orang Laut. They always move from one island to another, living in their small boat for weeks, and they do not establish a permanent community like the Arab and the Kazakhs in Central Asia. They also have not able to develop a political institution, and their social organization does not approach even the level of a clan, in a sense because they have no recognized community leader. All of them belong to the poor strata, and only the family structure makes the Bajau society possible. Roles and duties are allocated to every member from the parents down to their children, from the adult to the young ones. All of them have to work together or sama-sama for their survival. Poverty and backwardness are the two basic factors that keep every Bajau family from sending their children to school. They are often exploited in some economic activities, and minimal rewards or compensation are given for their labor, and low prices for their commodities like lobsters and fish. The next subclusters are the Sama Balimbing, Sama Simunul, or the Sama Sibuto. These groups claims to be the origin of all Sama subgroups scattered throughout the Sulu archipelago. They inhabited most major islands of Tawi-Tawi, and these people have a high level of literacy role compared to other Sama subgroup. Almost every Sama barangay in the mainland has a public school. Higher institutional learning is also available, such as the MSU Tawi-Tawi and the Tawi-Tawi Regional Agricultural College, or the TRAC. Another subcluster is called the Sama Bangingi. Their dialect is just a variation of the Sama language. The geographical distance being separated from other Sama groups by seas has caused the variation of their dialect from their mother tongue. But generally, all Sama people understand each other. The Bangingi have a well-developed social organization compared to the Tausugs. The Bangingi people were good sailors. The Bangingi, unlike the Bajau, is highly exposed to Filipino society and its institution. The majority of them have studied in the Filipino school and managed to occupy key positions in the government. Unfortunately, they failed to build their own institutions like schools, political parties, and businesses that are capable of effecting social changes in society. Another subcluster is called the Jama Mapun. The term Mapun stands for West. They call themselves Jama Mapun because they are situated in the distant west of Sulu. They called their dialect Pulon Mapun, which is part of the Sama language. The Jama Mapun adopted permanent settlement, hence they have a clear-cut social organization where the Panglima is recognized as the top community leader. The whole Cagayan de Tawi-Tawi is recognized as a local government unit, a municipality under the province of Tawi-Tawi. With this, the Jama Mapun have been subjected to central control from Manila since the days of the Philippine Commonwealth Government in 1936. Government schools and agencies were put up there and placed under the control of the local people. And those are the subclusters that make up the Sama people.
The Sangil. Sangil descended from Sangihe, an archipelago in eastern Indonesia from where they hailed. The tribe was already Muslim long before they came to the Philippines. and ahead of the introduction of Islam to Mindanao. Sangil, an Austronesian language, appears to have any affinity to Sama with regards to the pronunciation of words, manner of speaking, and vocabulary. Concentrations of Sangil inhabit the islands of Balut and Sarangani, as well as parts of the coastal regions of South Cotabato and Davao del Sur provinces. These people have since become Filipino citizens and are called Sangil, a name derived from their place of origin. The Sangils are among the 13 Muslim ethno-linguistic groups in the Philippines and are estimated to number almost 10,000. The next is Kaagan. The Kaagan, also spelled as Kagan, Kalagan, or Klagan, and also called as the Spanish word Karagan. The Kaagan people are a subgroup of the Mandaya Mansaka people who speak the Kaagan language. The Kaagan, which comprises three subgroups, which are usually treated as different tribes: the Tagakaulo, the Kagan, and the Calao people of Samal. Kalagan was derived from the word Kaag, which means whisper. They are the Islamized indigenous people living in the western Davao Gulf area. Next is the Kulibugan. The Kulibugan resulted from the intermingling of the indigenous Sobonon populations with the indigenous Muslim populations in the coastal areas of Zamboanga. The population is concentrated along the western side of the provinces of both northern and southern Zamboanga, and a national count of over 11,000. The total population count is estimated of 32,227 by the year of 1994. The generalized culture is lowland central Philippine, focused on wet rice cultivation and some localized Sweden cultivation. Adaptation to the marine environment is made, but mostly in terms of domestic fishing. It is said that when the Muslim arrived in the Zamboanga and other parts of Mindanao, the original Indonesian settlers were pushed back from the coastal areas to the river. The name Sobanen comes from the word Subao, or river, which means river people. However, they later moved farther back to the hinterlands away from the disturbances by any settlers and the new settlers such as the Visayan and the Spanish colonizers. All Sobanen subgroups have their own dialects, but they remain mutually intelligible with each other.
Good day, everyone. In continuation of the discussion about the Muslim ethnic groups, I will tackling about the Palawan and the Mulbog. The first one is the Palawan. The early Muslim inhabitants in mainland Palawan were the Panimusan. Because many Tausug and Sulu Sultanate during the Sultanate period came and create a contact to Palawan in order to introduce Islam to the local citizens, resulting these people to be converted as Muslims. The Muslim municipalities can be mostly found in the southern part of Palawan, such as Batarasa, Rizal, Quezon, Brooks Point, and Española, where the Muslims has a power to dominate and lead the politics of such places. But the Palawani and Tausugs have been isolated to each other as there is no direct trade or cultural link between the two groups since the collapse of Sulu Sultanate. The next and the last Muslim ethnic group in the list is the Mulbog. They inhabited the Balabac Island located in the southernmost tip of Palawan. They are the earliest inhabitants of the island. The Mulbog have been influenced by the Muslim missionaries from Brunei and later accept and embraced Islam in their lives. It was all started when Muslim principalities rose from the eastern side of the Malay Peninsula and the Borneo, until they found the Philippines and influenced its people to learn about Islam. Historical gap. Historical gap is a period between two or more events keeping the new generation detached from the old ones. The new generation can no longer determine the culture of the past. So in simple terms, it is the changes of the culture, traditions, beliefs, and the way of living from the past generation to the present day because of some events that can affect our lives and our way of thinking. This is the case with the two periods of Bangsamoro history, the Sultanate era and the U.S. colonial period up to the present. The U.S. era in the Philippines brought historical gap distancing the Sultanate era from the present, because the culture of the people underwent transformation in 50 years' time under the U.S. rule. Then, 50 years after, the people developed a new culture, which is no longer the same orientation as what was then. By nature, jihad or a struggle requires collective action or sufficient participation from the Muslims, preferably to be led by the government under a righteous imam or a leader. There must be a group of Muslims, if not the entire masses, who shall carry out the jihad fi sabilillah. Failure to carry jihad will make the whole community in a state of sin.
Islam in the Philippines. The rise of Islamic political institutions in the Southeast Asia in the early 15th century is viewed as the culmination of Islamization. This political development was a turning point in the history of the people because it revealed two main important things: the formation of Muslim nationalism and the birth of the first Muslim society in the country. The introduction of the Sultanate implies that the indigenous institution become Islamized. This Sultanate was a superstructure imposed without destroying the old foundation. This was one of the reasons that made the Sulu Sultanate strong. Hashim Abu Bakr was the founder and the first Sultan of the Sulu Sultanate. His father was an Arab from Hadramaut and his mother was a princess from Johor. According to the Tausug, Abu Bakr belongs to the Sharif lineage. Sharif is a title of nobility, which is one of the descendants of Nabi Muhammad. Dr. Mahol or Cecil Adib Makbul was one of the foremost historian and thinker of Filipino nationalism. According to him, the history of the Sulu Sultanate had been one of war. It was able to survive two major colonial waves, the Spanish and the U.S. colonization. Despite of its political decline, the Sulu Sultanate remained their status as independent sultanate from 1450 to 1936. A Maranao oral revealed that the first Tausug preachers reached the Lanao Lake before the arrival of foreign Muslims missionary, possibly the Malay preachers. The people from these areas were already used to come to Hulu for trade as well as for Islamic learning. It is for this account that Sulu became known in history as the center of Islamic learning in this country. The full Islamization of the west coast of Mindanao was accelerated with the arrival of Muhammad Sharif Kabungsuan. It was the Sama people who guided him to Mindanao. During this period, inter-island contact was already in place. Like Abu Bakr, Kabungsuan was the descendant of Nabi Muhammad. He was accompanied by the Sama people to Mindanao that time, which means that it is not accidental. And besides, the Sama people already explored the Sulu archipelago. The first seat of political power of Maguindanao was Islagan and Maguindanao. The term Maguindanao actually referred to a family. It was the royal family with which Sharif Kabungsuan was linked through affinity. Since Maguindanao family became a symbol of Muslim power in Mindanao, their name became the official designation of Muslims throughout the Pulangi Valley.
In the Upper Pulangi Valley, the ruling datos were the Buayan family. Because of their influence, the whole areas were called Buayan. The political institution of the Buayans became Islamized. After the death of Kabungsuan, the Buayan family founded the Sultanate of Buayan as independent entity from the Maguindanao Sultanate. The existence of two sultanates in mainland Mindanao strengthened Islam but often the source of friction between the Buayan group and the Maguindanao. In lull times, these sultanates fought each other for political supremacy over Mindanao. One of the best Maguindanao rulers was Rahab Buisan, who was the leading commander during the third stage of the Moro Wars. He was remembered for his famous speech at the Lag Leyte, where he delivered his message inspiring the Datos of Leyte to rise against the Spaniards. In his battle against the Spaniards, he aligned himself with Raha Sirungan, the ruler of the Buayan Sultanate. The Buayan leaders managed to gain supremacy in the Pulangi Valley only after the death of Raha Buisan. The latter was succeeded by his son Sultan Kudarat. During his ascension to power, Kudarat was too young. It was for this reason the Maguindanao Sultanate became overwhelmed. It took more than 10 years for Sultan Kudarat to build his political power over the whole of Mindanao. He is remembered for his political prowess in uniting the two sultanates and the rest of the people in Mindanao under his strong leadership. The political hold of the Maguindanao Sultanate over Mindanao, however, did not last long. Dynastic quarrels often broke out among the Muslim leaders. In the later part of the 18th century, the Maguindanao Sultanate loosened its hold upon the Buayan. Its steady decline continued up to the arrival of the American colonialists in 1900s. This decline created a vacuum of leadership and finally led to the rise of small principalities in Mindanao, while others proclaimed their own sultanates, as in the case of the 18 royal houses in Lanao area. The current continued political assertion of the Maranao people should be viewed from the political development on the part of their society, which began to evolve as a political institution towards the later part of the 18th century. This development did not move further. The struggle of Amay Pakpak, a great Maranao fighter, was short-lived. While building his own political clout, he suffered defeat in the hands of the Spanish invading forces in March 10, 1895. His dream of a strong political organization was not realized and was further arrested with the introduction of U.S. imperialism in 1900s. Although the Lanao royal houses still exist, they are no longer viewed as a political force of the society.